Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day.
So in your conversations with the apostle, it sounds like you weren't really asking for his help to resolve issues. You weren't looking for him to answer
more
questions.
Of a pronouncement.
You were trying to affirm to him your beliefs,
right,
and help persuade him to help you get reinstated as full members.
And I think
we
I was
just
looking maybe
didn't
for a
want to
little
be the
repentance
fallen
there,
people.
you know?
Yeah.
Like I
To
felt
repent.
some bad, I feel guilt all the time, but especially, I thought, if this is true, if the church, because I still, at that time, that possibility was in my mind and in my heart. Again, I wanted it to be. And so I thought, I don't believe it right now, but faith can be developed, if I can reconnect and I can rekindle and I can believe again. I don't know that Brooke was there. I think Brooke was more like, I'll reconnect, but...
Yes, well, and actually this is a good question to lead us to what happened next, because I really felt like, I still felt very firmly that a lot of the realizations that we had with the opening to compassion and opening to a world of color and kind of stepping outside of this very tiny box, there was no way that I knew I couldn't go back to the box. And so at that point, I was like, maybe I can nuance some of the beliefs. And when I say that I believe in the Book of Mormon, I'll always be able to know in the back of my head that there are still a lot of, like maybe I can just do this for the greater good. And the following week, when we returned to church, it was very sweet and people were wonderful. And of course, everyone,
tears were shed.
Told us how they had been praying us back. And
they knew that we'd come back.
Sure.
That was common.
And that was
we knew you'd come
tremendously nice of them, because I know that it comes from a good place. But we sat down and met with the bishop, and I spoke to him about just how this really had been a process of love. And he said, yes, but God is also the God of the Old Testament. And it was almost like the breath was sucked out of me, and I thought, dang it, I'm not going to be able to do it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go to that place
What else did he say? What was he saying? What was the point he was trying to make?
I think that he was trying to...
that, but...
oh, you don't?
That there's justice? That you're going to have to pay?
In other words, it's not all about love. That this is the same God who
justice,
killed
mercy.
the Egyptians, who opened the Red Sea.
I don't remember that exactly, but
It's okay.
Actually,
what do you remember, Brooke?
The sentiment.
It's okay.
Yeah, he said he is also the God of the Old Testament. And for me, what that was saying is, there's love and compassion, but you have to understand that the rules and the obedience is more important. Obedience is the first principle. And all that other stuff is by stuff. And for me, again, I kind of felt like I had opened myself to what I believe is a true Christian message that has been lost, through various forms of all sorts of things throughout lives. And I'm certainly not perfect at living it, but to pretend to go back to insisting that knowing the Bible is more important than knowing and seeking to become like a God that is all loving, I just knew that I felt like it was going to be a waste of my time. But again, it was okay. We wanted this approval from all of these people, and so we went and sat down with the stake president.
Same day.
Bishop,
stake president, same day.
And he listened. The following week,
where he also said, I'm going to need to call the office of the first presidency. I also had instructions from the apostle to have him call him directly and talk with him about our interview and about his feelings. And he did both of those things, and we were kind of under the impression that you might have to wait up to a year to be rebaptized. But it was the next week, I think, or was it 2 weeks later? I think it was the very next week. So within about 2 weeks of this whole thing happening, 3 at the most, the good news had been received that the McLays can come back in anytime they'd like.
Get rebaptized.
Yeah.
Right. And I found...
all the way from the top.
We
had
felt that,
and
I think that again, opposition in all things, we felt that was a sign of intense love and trust for us, that they would trust that we were being honest, and everything we said to them was honest in our desire to try to come back and be back to the people we were. But I also started to feel like there was a lot of control there, and that terrified me, that we would have to dress our entire family in white and go through what I thought was a slightly humiliating experience of rebaptizing everyone. You know, that I just...
Well, it felt a little bit like damage control to me.
This was, yeah, because I thought...
The sooner you get the McLays back, the sooner you cover up the damage that might be done by us leaving.
Well, and I felt
maybe that's not fair, because
warmth of God in our lives. And so to feel like somehow, and at this time we had been told by the bishop, we are not to take the sacrament because only people who understand and accept and appreciate
that bothered me.
The covenant with the atonement are allowed to take the sacrament. And so here we are, a family of 6, not taking the sacrament, and now we have to all be, when we had just written a letter, you know, and so for me, that really started feeling difficult because, again, this idea that God is so much bigger, that he would come into my heart and create benevolent feelings, but it has to all be controlled under the guise of all of these people who have to okay us. That started to really sit in conflict, and taking that step started to become more and more difficult to say, yeah, let's just do it for show.
By the time we had that second meeting with the stake president, in which he joyfully expressed to us that we had permission to be rebaptized, and on the way there I said, I'm not sure what he's going to say, but if he does say, and I was just expressing this to Brooke, that we can be rebaptized, I said, I just want you to know I'm not ready. I'm not there, and I don't feel like I can commit myself, because that is a commitment.
Right.
Baptism is saying I believe and I'm going to live, and I said I'm not there, and then I start having all these, you know, Moroni, is it in the book of Moroni that where we used the scripture on my mission that talks about how blessings come after, and I you know, I start doing these mental gymnastics. If I just go back, then I can have the faith rebuilt. But until I do, I've lost the spirit,
and certainly there are blessings to that life, and I will say full-heartedly that, you know, were we to go back into the waters of baptism and just go back into that life, I certainly think that there is some level of fulfillment. But I also think that we're keenly aware now of a different level of fulfillment that we would also have to sacrifice to make. It's not an easy choice. And I can see why people choose to stay. And I also feel okay right now with taking a big, fat, long sabbatical for a time. And so, you know, we just slowly, as that fear wore off and as we started to find a new rhythm for our Sundays especially, and as, to be honest, as we felt reopened, like we had almost, that experience of saying we're coming back reconciled us. And so it like reopened the communication a little bit with some people. And so it was almost like instead of cutting this part of our lives off, we just stepped away from it. But I feel comfortable any Sunday, and I have been back on several Sundays with the kids to sit in there, because that is and will always be a portion of my home. So I feel grateful for that, and I feel like that for us was a healthy, healing place to be.
The comeback that we've sort of announced, and I expressed to Brooke, I was concerned as we drove to Utah. I said, can we please not say anything to my parents or my family unless we're going to go back for sure? And so because I thought it's too sensitive, it can be. Yeah,
we didn't want to play.
We didn't want to play with people's emotions, or we wanted to be genuine and thoughtful. But now, sitting in this place now, I can see that I think some healing came because of that. And it was part of our journey, it was part of our story. But we're not in a place, I'm not personally, where I can make that commitment again. And I'm not sure that I ever will be. I'm not where I'm at right now. And my wife, she, as you have heard, she speaks openly and often about God. And I feel I have maybe different feelings about that than her, and we're not on the exact same page as far as how we view God and that idea, but I think we both also felt a control, and it was very subtle, but it was almost like you can come back, but only under our terms and our circumstances. And the bishop repeatedly asked for requests to meet with us. And I finally said, you know, Bishop, we don't really feel like we need to meet. If we need to, I'll let you know. But I started to feel these pangs again of...
You were being correlated.
We're being correlated in that the church is very much about controlling. And then again, all those red flags go up. Is that how we want our kids to be raised? Do we want our kids to be correlated as we were and indoctrinated as we were, so that they might have to go through this same thing? And anyway, where we're at right now is no. We, at least, I don't know if I can speak for both of us, but we don't plan on going back or being rebaptized.
Well,
but
going back, yes. We'll go on any
Sure.
given Sunday.
But what I've been
Yes.
very open with people and saying, I haven't ruled that out, because I think there would be some hypocrisy in me saying, on one hand, that I was bothered by this superlative statement of absolute truth and certainty, and then to leave that for absolute certainty on another hand. I'm open to learning, to knowledge, and the possibility that I might be wrong.
Yeah, which is why, I mean, I think that one of the best parts, early in this process, I was talking to a PR manager of one of my blogging programs, and I remember him saying, you have the right to ask these questions. And that almost surprised me, because no one had ever given me permission to ask questions. And so I've kind of taken that on as like an invitation to a spiritual journey. And so I think that one of the best parts of a spiritual journey is when there's mystery and suspense and surprise, and you end up surprising yourself. I know that Jana Rice surprised herself. She ended up being Mormon when she never saw that in her future. And I think that we have to allow ourselves the right to surprise ourselves. And so that's why it would surprise me, but not surprise me, if 15 years down the road we decide that our only home has been Mormonism and we go back. And maybe it won't, but I want to stay open to that mystery. And
Yeah.
So we've now talked about your loss of faith, your resignation, your thoughts about returning, and where you are now. Now I would like to sort of really shift gears for a moment away from your stories. Now that both of you, Brooke and John, have had a chance to reflect on what you taught for the church education system, the CES curriculum, what you taught in seminary, what you taught in institute, what you taught at EFY, we want this to be constructive, right? My hope would be that someone somewhere, other seminary teachers, other institute teachers, the church education system, I'm dreaming here, but the people will actually take a chance to listen to your story and find out things that they can learn to make the church a better place, to make CES a better place, to make Seminary and Institute a better place. So what I'd like to do is take some time to just list. The first one is going to sound like we're being critical, but that is not the intent. But I want to explore teachings that you, or more importantly, just CES in general, or just church curriculum, things that are taught that you believe are damaging, that are hurting people. We don't need to drill too much into any one, but I just want to go through and list all the areas that, and this can be through the way that we can talk conceptually about the way that we teach about epistemology and thinking and feeling and the spirit and how things can be known. We can talk about historical issues where false things are taught or things are left out. We can talk about doctrinal things. I want to get to the two levels of what you all knew as CES instructors, but then what you were teaching and the disparity between that sometimes. And then the cultural messages that are taught or encouraged. And then even some of the object lessons that are used and how sometimes those can be damaging. I want to just boom, 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 list all those with then the intent of saying, okay, now that we've said where we see harm being done or things being left out or inaccuracies being perpetuated, then we'll shift constructively to how could CES do a better job and do its job in a way to hurt less people and to help more people.
Sure. Okay.
So let's start with the laundry list.
Okay. Well, conceptually, I think maybe just that one of the things that I think is harmful is not so much of what's being said, but I guess maybe a sin of omission and what's being left out. Let me take, for example, what I would call elitism. And one of the things that I've heard, and you've probably heard this as well, is that, Mormons are fond of saying something to the effect of, I've never once sat in a class where we have belittled another church or gone to a lesson where we have been mean, and yet there's all these other churches that have firesides and seminars about Mormonism, how to combat it, this influence of Mormonism. But I don't think that's true. And in my seminary classrooms, I might say things, if I was talking about another church specifically, I would leave out the name of the church, even though, I might say something like, as you know, students, there are churches that believe that you should baptize children, and they practice, and there's always some 14-year-old guy who's going to go, that's the Catholics, Brother McLay, or something like that. But I would try really hard not to specifically say, let me cut to the chase. The point is, backhandedly, we are sending the message that we're the best, that it's us versus them. Whether we come out and say they're bad, this is wrong, don't be like them by name, we are, without question, in the church right now and in the curriculum, putting us up like this and therefore them down like this. Now, some of my colleagues might disagree with that, and they might say passionately, and they would be right, some of my closest friends are members of other faiths, and don't you know we have BYU professors that are on these faith councils and all of these things. But the message of the curriculum is one true church, us versus them. I think that's damaging.
Yeah, I think also there's a huge focus on emotion is how we make decisions, emotion and sheer obedience. And so some of just the logical thinking skills are really stinted because these kids are, and I think that most members of the church are pushed into a system where we always know that the answer is the church is true, and therefore everything will tell us that the church is true. Any question that you have should align with prophets. And so
you start with the conclusion.
Yes. And so rather than saying, we want to help you gain skills for your spiritual journey, there's a very, very tight wall that you have to stay within to make that spiritual journey okay, which of course makes it a very narrow space of thought. And so for any of the kids who are struggling, doubting, worrying, concerned, John had a student come up with him about a question with evolution, and John said that he could just tell that this kid had been tormented and had really been trying to think through it within the context, and rather than praising them for having original thoughts or even doubts or being skeptical in any way, that's immediately closed down. And I do think that there's...
I said, it sounds like you've been thinking a lot, and I encourage you to continue doing that.
But that wouldn't be the normal...
No, I don't think, not for you.
No, it wouldn't be. Because that was on May 22nd of this year, and this was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, and he was trying to wrap his mind around what
I'm just saying, in CES, if the average kid goes to the average teacher and says, I'm really struggling with evolution, the average response would be...
The brethren have said, the First Presidency has said, here's where you can read about it.
Or maybe, I believe in evolution, but along with all of this too.
Always back to the scriptures. If I had $1 for every time I was reminded to keep the doctrine pure or to stick with the curriculum, or told that the curriculum had been approved by the First Presidency, I had one colleague that would say, this stuff has been on the desk of the First Presidency. Now, literally or metaphorically, the idea was, this is what we teach. And so there wasn't a lot of room for, there's really no room for deviation.
I think one of my big concerns too is that because of the rigorous system, the rigorous pathway to become a CES teacher, a lot of original thinkers are weeded out of the process. And so what happens is you have these great people that are teaching really good lessons, and they're doing a good job of it. But when a youth comes to them and says, I have a doubt, or I have a legitimate concern, what you're not doing is creating a space for that to be safe. And so, I feel like in that way, sometimes we're doing disservice to our youth rather than saying, all right, doubt is a natural part of life, and, that's okay. You can have a doubt. We say, don't doubt, don't doubt. And, we saw that even as recently as General Conference, where doubting is shame, shame, shame on you. And so, I feel like just that whole process of choosing a CES teacher, while there are certainly varying personalities, there is a very narrow space of thought.
I want to say one of the things that I give credit to CES for is that I perceived during my time in there a constant desire to change and to get better and to evolve. However, it's a difficult thing for me to process, because at the same time there was also this kind of idea that that we were kind of bulletproof, like this is the Lord's work and this is the true church, and so we're not going anywhere. You know, your job is secure, and we had an administrator once come to us and speak to us at an area conference, where, if I remember correctly, the way that he phrased it, he was referring to our influence as seminary and institute teachers for youth in the church, that demographic, 14 to 18 for seminary, 18 to 30, and I think the phrase he used was, you're the only game in town. I mean, we were made to feel incredibly important.
In terms of what? The only game in town in terms
keeping
of
kids faithful, helping them with their testimony.
The only game in
Right.
town in the church.
That we were making, and I want to go back to something Brooke said, because I think some of my colleagues will watch this, and I think that will be a good thing. I don't want to say that in CES there are no thinkers, or that there are no, you know as well as I do, incredibly bright, articulate, deep men.
And kind.
That then some of these colleagues are their intellects are far superior than mine. But this isn't a question of intellect. This is, to me, and I'm going back to your initial question, where's the harm done? The harm is done in the dishonesty, in the way that the history and the doctrines are presented, as opposed to what they really are. To me, that's damaging to the psyche of a young person. Why is it that a 40-something-year-old bishop will resign from being a bishop, or let's say a 52-year-old man or woman suddenly gets this information and goes, are you sure that's true? You know, there's all these things like, really? And you can say, yeah, it's in the Journal of Discourses, or let me give you a reference. You can get this at Deseret Book or whatever. And then they receive that, and there's this, and I'm coming back to CES with this. That's not what I learned in seminary. That's not what my seminary and institute teacher told me. I heard the Joseph Smith story. I mean, I don't know how many times I've shared that story of whether it's the first vision or his life or his marriages or polygamy. I think that it's not being presented accurately and honestly.
Yes, and you know what? In the words of Tim Minchin, I think that I've kind of, for me, he says,
he's great.
You know, his problem with churches is they teach children to feel ashamed and to judge things as plain right or wrong. And I think that for me, that's the essence, is that underlying some of these really great lessons is this feeling like if there is a problem where your faith is not enough, it's your problem.
Right.
And so there's a lot of shaming in that way, a lot of focus on outward appearances, even though Jesus Christ himself said that we focus on the heart. And just this concept that things can be plain right or wrong. And so, you know, I know that John in his own classes has had concerns with gay students that are not being embraced, and that is a terrible way to grow up, to not be embraced. And if there's any place you should be embraced, it's within a group of people who are seeking to be Christian. So for me, you know, I think that the specific lessons are nice. Some of them teach really great ideas and
no question.
Lessons on courage, and they help you. You know, you're a myth lover. When you can be placed in a myth, that's powerful, but coming clean and telling you that you're being placed in, you know, it's different for me to imagine that I'm Cinderella than I am being told literally going to be something that perhaps is not necessarily founded by actual historical information.
Right. Okay.
When I was on the High Council, approximately 10 years ago, Elder L. Tom Perry came to speak to our stake. And he met with the High Council beforehand, and I was very young. I was 28 when I was called to be on a High Council, and I was still fairly new. We went around the table to introduce everybody that was present at the meeting, and when the stake president introduced me, he said, and this is our CES man. This is our seminary principal. Now, the other CES man at the time was in the stake presidency, so he was sitting right up there with Elder Perry. This is Brother McLay. He's the seminary principal, and Elder Perry looked at me and without hesitation said, he said something like, well, hello, Brother McLay. It's very nice to meet you. When are you going to join the church like the rest of us? And I kind of had this uneasy chuckle, like, what does he mean? You know, and I'm taking copious notes and I have this, I still have these notes. When are you going to join the church? And everybody, it was kind of an uneasy chuckle, but it's interesting to me that he would say that. And there has been a discussion in CES for as long as I have been in it, saying that, and this has been a big push of recent years, the priesthood leads this church. And I think that there was a recognition that maybe CES has sort of taken the reins of developing testimonies, in a way that maybe isn't healthy, and that you've got CES here and the church here, and we need to be united.
So you think Elder Perry had concerns about CES?
Personally, I think he may have. Otherwise, why say that? Where did that come from? I can't read his mind, but that was a very interesting comment, and maybe he was just trying to be.
I'll just say that in my interview with Terrell Gibbons, basically the comment was, if I remember it correctly, is that CES is destroying the church.
Yeah, I think he said that the curriculum is an abomination or something.
I don't know if it was that strong, but
he used a big word.
I don't want to misquote him, but the sentiment was that CES is doing damage.
I think that you're right, because I listened to that podcast twice, as a matter of fact, and I think you've hit the spirit of it was that there needs to be a major overhaul, and that until that happens, we're going to continue to see, and I agree with this, we are going to continue to see people who are taught one thing in a certain way based on this curriculum, who then later on in life discover what really happened, or a different story, or a different way of looking at it, and it blows their mind, especially when the beloved prophets like Gordon B. Hinckley say there is no middle ground.
And my understanding is that Marlon Jensen, the member of the Quorum of the 70, feels this similarly.
Which is so funny, because in CES, I can honestly say that I felt like, and I still kind of feel this way, that like what you get in CES is like the real undiluted truth. Like, we are gathering all of the doctrine and we are putting it together, and we're going to talk about some of the history that you won't hear on a Sunday. So it's a really fascinating dichotomy to hear it spoken of that way, and I can see both sides.
So let's continue, just if we can, this sort of lightning round of listing the things that are damaging.
You bet.
Yeah,
maybe I would say that the insistence on the sacrifice for seminary and the demonization of a student who would rather take orchestra or math or something else, there's a lot of guilt, I think, perpetuated if they don't want to take seminary. Brooke and I talked a little bit about, we think modesty is good, but that sometimes it
becomes too much of a focus.
Yeah. Modesty.
Yeah.
Dressing.
Let me tell you from a CES perspective, I have some colleagues that were able to find a way to approach maybe a young woman who was wearing a low-cut blouse and make a statement regarding that. But I felt like my hands are tied here. I am not going to say anything out of line or inappropriate or in any way suggestive, even though, so you'd refer repeatedly to the Strength of the Youth pamphlet, and like, even J. Reuben Clark said in that Hallmark address to church educational employees that we don't want to sneak up behind them and whisper religion in their ears. Yet I felt like I often had to do that. Like, I couldn't be direct because it would be offensive or inappropriate, and I tried very hard to live the standards with.
And what's wrong with focusing on, what's the downside of focusing too much on modesty? Just briefly.
Well, I feel like sometimes what you focus on is what they focus on, and so what you get are two extremes: either the kids who are trying to draw attention to themselves by being immodest, or the people who are so uber modest that they feel guilt, or rather than it being essentially a non-issue or just a small side note to a good healthy choice for self-esteem or whatever.
Yeah.
When it becomes some aspect of your spirituality, I don't know that
I can address this specifically in relation to EFY. The standards for participants have become more and more rigid over the years, and I've struggled with that because my feeling is they should become less and less rigid.
And what are they now?
Young men must have their hair cut above their ears, to the point of if they show up on the day of registration and it's not appropriate, they cannot come, whether they've paid or not. There are people there to give them a haircut on the spot, or the leaders will take
Girls'
them down.
skirts to the
Girls'
knees.
skirts have to go to the knees. We had a leader in our stake who criticized flip-flop wearing in church, which I just think is ridiculous, and that can be off-putting for people
No
that are
straps, like no tank tops or anything. You've got to have a sleeve.
Anything about earrings?
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
with the one earring.
Just one pair of earrings.
And again, I think that in some ways that can be a good thing because you create a distinctive Mormon appearance, and so you feel some camaraderie because everybody's in this together, but at the same time, that is setting us apart. Again, it kind of pushes this us versus them
It's hard to
mentality.
imagine Christ saying, "Wearest thou only onest pair of earrings?" Or
especially since
"Wearest
he was,
not thou sandals?"
especially,
It's hard to
especially
imagine.
since he was
Or Christ
embracing
saying,
the prostitute.
"Cutteth thine hair to an appropriate
Although
length.
my hair beeth long, thou shalt not have.
Thou shalt not have facial hair like mine."
And I understand.
Right? I mean, it's
It is.
Right, it is.
Well,
And that-
especially because, again, I think some of the most powerful stories of the Christ message
Are where-
are where he embraces the prostitute, allows the woman with the issue of blood, the lepers. This is
the
I
sinners,
felt
the
like-
this is who
publicans.
should be
Yeah.
embraced.
I felt like as a CES employee, as a teacher, as an EFY director and stuff, there was too much effort to try to control young people. Instead of saying, let them be and allow them to develop and grow as they will. And obviously there needs to be standards. If you're going to do certain things in a youth camp setting, we're going to send you home because they're against the law, they're hurtful or whatever. But that kind of control of you can't do this and you must do this and it has to be this way. Another thing I would add, and this is in CES, but maybe generally in the church, is that fatalism kind of end of the world kind of. The world is really bad. There's really a lot of evil out there, and we must be guarded against the. I remember graphs and charts. I think Elder Pinnock spoke to us once years ago, and I brought my notes. I don't know why, because I was going through some boxes recently, but one of the charts on there shows this idea that the church has a standard and is kind of getting better, but the rest of the world is going down. And I remember a member of a stake presidency saying the Lord's standard stays the same and the rest of the world is going down, and we can't be the kind of members who are just a little bit better than what the rest of the world is doing. We have to keep our standards. To me, that's damaging in that it says, again, you are better than other people, and you have to stay being better than other people because look how bad everybody and everything is getting.
Right.
That kind
so
of
it
end of the
forces
world
this,
mentality.
Let's stick together. And I think just along those same lines, I believe it was Tal Bachman who had written an article about how really when you look at over time, our morality as a society, we have more safety, more health. We really are
Women's
becoming
rights,
incredible.
minority rights.
Sure.
So,
We are increasing in morality
less
as
war,
a whole.
more democracy.
Yeah.
Less
The health and wealth of the world has gone up in every nation in the last 100
Without retreating
years.
or retracting.
There are good things that are happening, and I felt like that even though we used quotes in the curriculum, like we would talk about President Hinckley saying what a great time it is to be alive, and isn't it great? It was always with this idea that, but it's greater if you're a member. And it's the greatest for us because we have this special thing, and we must be the recruiters of everyone else, or else they can't be completely happy.
And it is a great thing.
It is. With kindness
We
and
have to
respect, I
yeah.
think that was done. But I can also see now, from where I sit, the damage that can be done in that kind of elitist us versus
Yeah.
them mentality.
Well, and I recognize that people, if your coworkers do watch this, and we do love you, by the way, but I think that there is some concern for me over just the literalism of the Book of Mormon, because, as when you are where we are, and you get to a point where, okay, so our 8-year-old son, when I said, kids, we want to talk to you about a few things that we're a little bit concerned about within the church that are not making sense. And from the back of the car pipes up my 8-year-old and he says, like Adam and Eve, as if 2 white people could make all of these people. And I thought, oh my gosh, my 8-year-old who was never allowed to say anything is starting to feel some disconcertment there. So I feel like there are some things that had to happen in the Old Testament, for instance, the Tower of Babel, to make the Book of Mormon real. And so when you have to take everything completely literally, or it's your fault that you're not seeing the emperor in his clothes, to me that's a dangerous place. Again, this, either it's all true or none of it is, because what you're setting these kids up for is saying, well, these flesh and blood people in my life are good, but some of this is uncomfortable or not making sense. And so you create this dichotomy where they're not allowed to pick and choose. And I think that it's not always a safe way, again, for them to explore their own faith or their own understandings. And so you create this big, fat, horrible life thing that can happen. So I do have some concerns about just the literalism of the Book of Mormon, that we could teach some of those lessons for the aspect of the lesson.
But as soon as you go to, hey, this book might be good allegory, it loses its appeal, and it's no longer the most correct book and the keystone of our religion and all those things if it's just allegorical and not historical. Let me give you another one and that comes to my mind that's specific to CES. They kind of, whether it means to or not, but it creates these go-to men, and sometimes women, but not very often, that are kind of heroes and elevated. So as hard as I tried not to, when I would go to EFYs or as the seminary teacher, people would look to you with respect and they kind of would revere you. I mean, I used to joke that I could go to EFY and it wouldn't matter what I would say, the kids would applaud or be responsive. I could burp the alphabet and they would be like, Brother McLay, I mean, they were really kind, and also I was riding on the coattails of the established organization and a very wonderful program that EFY is, but in many ways. I don't know that there's a way to get around that. I don't ever recall sitting in a gospel doctrine class where if somebody said, "Where's that scripture?" or "What's that doctrine?" heads would turn. Brother McLay, like I'm the go-to guy. And I used to joke with my students and with ward members that I would say I have an answer to every question you can ask me. There's not a gospel question I can't answer. I said more than half the time my answer is I don't know, but feel free to ask me anything, because I was unashamed to say I don't know. But at the same time, as I look back, if I'm being honest about my representation of the church and its history and the doctrines and all of these things, I was guarded. I wasn't gonna call it not casting pearls before swine, but these specific issues of polygamy and polyandry and the Book of Abraham and blood atonement and the Adam God theory, they never came into my classroom in the way that I personally studied them, because it would not have been accepted. I would have lost my job. I'm going to be just candid about saying that if I would have taught the things the way that I now view them, that is the history and the doctrine, it would have been tantamount to apostasy, and I would not have had my job. I would have been reprimanded or pulled from the classroom or fired. And that's a problem, because this is our history. This is what it was. And we can debate all over back and forth about, yeah, but is it? And don't we want to reflect the spirit of goodness? And what is the church really about? But when it comes down to it, I think one of the greatest disservices that, whether it's meant to happen, and I don't think it's malicious, but we're not representing accurately in CES what the church really is, because either it's glossed over or brushed right past, and you get, like at an EFY, emotion really reigns supreme. And so there's this wave of emotion that you just ride through the week, and it's incredibly, it brings you together, it's bonding. And testimonies are born. And I felt it myself. People make big decisions based on that 1 week experience. But at the same time, and I'm not saying why would you have a conference to try to talk people out of their faith? That would be silly. So where's the balance for CES? In other words, what changes would they have to make? I don't know that they care to hear my opinion or not, but
let's cover that after we finish the list.
Okay. Did you have anything else on the list that...
No, I'm afraid I should have more opinions.
What about just relying on emotion?
Yeah, I think that
we talked about that a bit.
Yeah, and I think that
is the way you encourage a testimony.
Yes.
Right. They're very...
I do have something to say about that.
Okay,
but go ahead. If you...
Well, no, I just feel like because that was so the way that I was trained, I saw nothing wrong with it. And of course, I think as a woman that reliance on emotion comes very naturally. But now, of course, I will be, in experiences with my own children, I can look back and see that some of the choices that we made based on emotion and obedience were perhaps not the best. Did blessings come? Yes. Blessings often come from our choices if we're looking for those blessings. But I feel like, again, back to rational thinking muscles, there's just some aspect of allowing those rational thinking muscles to develop in a way and encouraging that and putting our trust, again, when we had contacted a variety of people who have really helped us with our faith experience, they never offered us the answer, but they always offered us their trust in our capabilities. And I don't think that we do that enough with our youth. We don't offer them our trust in their abilities to make choices for themselves, to view the world with realistic lens, to try on and make mistakes. I have an absolute fear of mistakes still because I wanted to be perfect. And so I think that allowing that and actually encouraging it in some ways.
There's a problem with that, though.
I know.
More and more people would leave.
I'm
being very candid here.
Totally
that if we were completely open, let me just tell you that last year, one of the seminary teachers, who was one of my former colleagues, taught that while translating the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith put his head in a hat with a stone, and the plates weren't even present. He taught that because it's not in the seminary manual, but it is briefly mentioned in the Institute manual. And so he felt like he was on safe ground bringing that into the classroom. A question came up, and he kind of mentioned it in passing. Father of a student was at his house either that night or the next day saying, basically, how dare you teach something to my son that could damage his faith and his testimony of the church, and kind of raked him over the coals. To me, that's an example. There's a problem there. If Joseph Smith really did that, which he did, and that was part of the process, then we need to get that information out there and then let people decide for themselves. If to do a cost-benefit analysis with actual information, do I stay and commit my life to this, or perhaps am I going to make a different decision and move in a different direction?
Right.
But you said something, John, about testimony and developing. The entire structure of as I see it and saw it, of CES, was what I would call the Moroni perspective. It is all true. The church is true. Joseph was a prophet. The Book of Mormon is true. And you eventually will figure it out, and we're here to help you. So take your journey, warm your hands on the flame of my testimony or whatever, but pray about it, but you're going to come to a knowledge that it's true. So the base assumption is that everything that we say and that we teach is true. And if you're not realizing that, you're not coming to it, the problem is yours. It's that cliche that the people in the church are not perfect, but the church is perfect. I'm telling you, that needs to change. We need to be able to start saying the church is not perfect and the people are not perfect. There's issues with both of these parties, and I don't know that CES, for obvious reasons, if their focus is to strengthen the testimony of youth to be true believing members of the church and to serve missions and get married in the temple. And I will tell you that is the teaching emphasis. Christ is at the forefront, testimony of Christ, believing in Christ. But family, missions, temple marriage, all of these things that we've been correlated to accept as our fundamental beliefs are what we perpetuate and teach in CES, without question.
And I was with Jared and Katrina Anderson and John and Zilpha Larson and Greg and Letty Rockwell for dinner last week, and something came up, I forgot who said it, but we're talking about the value of religion and the risk of religion, and basically what someone said, I think it was John Larson, is he was concerned about the fact that people have emotional and maybe even spiritual experiences, and how easy it is for religions to prey upon that, to manipulate people into doing things that they want the people to do. Sure. Like, it's one thing that people feel emotions and maybe even the spirit, but his problem with religion is that religion seizes on that and then manipulates people.
I would agree.
Yes.
And I was expert at it. Meaning, that sounded boastful. I was good at what I did, and I was good at helping people to develop testimonies and to feel emotion. Maybe that's why I'd have people come up and like from the ward and say, Brother McLay, give me some of your best tear-jerking talks. And I'd say, what do you mean? You know, the kind that when you just get everybody feeling, I need something to really elicit emotion.
And connect the dots for us. So you whip up emotion, then what?
Well, and then I add my testimony. First of all, not just emotion, but I build a relationship of trust. If they look to me and say, I trust him, or even I love him, and he makes me laugh, and he's an articulate, kind person who seems to enjoy his life and be very happy, then I nail him with, and I know the church is true, and I bear that testimony. And
you make them feel the emotion.
Absolutely. And when the emotion is very much there.
The emotion is, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we explain the emotion to be connected to equal the church is true. So whether it's a moment of I'm losing something scary, I'm feeling something wonderful, all of these things equal the church is true, rather than I'm feeling highly emotional, so maybe I need to think through and understand why I'm feeling this way.
Would you like a specific example of how I do that?
I don't think it's always bad. I will say from the woman's perspective.
Right. Well, I had a student come in
important.
once, and I could tell she was distraught. And I said, come here to my office for a second. And I said, are you okay? And just asking that, it was like waterworks. She was shaking. She was sobbing so hard she was shaking. And I thought, oh no. This is very serious, death of a loved one. I mean, this reaction was surprising me. And this was just before class. And when she could finally get the words out, she said, my goat died last night. And I said, called her by name and said, I am so sorry to hear that. So then when I went into class, emotion for her was very high. Emotion for me was very high. And so I was able to go to Doctrines of Salvation and talk about the resurrection of animals. I was then able to say, and I brought it right into the atonement of Jesus Christ, and bore testimony that I think I even used the phrase, Jesus knows what it's like to have your goat die. And she's weeping, and the class is starting to cry. But then I was able to say, in ways that I can't understand, with all this emotion present, the Savior knows our pains and our sorrows and things that we go through. And it was a very beautiful moment. But to say that that's separate from emotion, it would be dishonest. Emotion is part of, and that for me, in my journey, emotion works for everybody, Mormons and non-Mormons. And so when you go to the macro perspective and you say, why does somebody who's Muslim believe what they believe, or Jehovah's Witness, or whatever? This is where I take issue with religion in general. If you don't think emotion's involved for them, you're crazy. Of course it is. Of course they feel emotion that helps. It leads to confirmation bias, I think, for saying, oh good, now that I've cried, now that I've felt this, then this thing must be true. What he's telling me must be true. Doesn't matter the faith, really, in my
Okay,
opinion.
well, and I have a different take on that, because I believe that some of these emotions that we have as human beings and some of these spiritual experiences, we don't always have a perfect language to explain them. And so I feel that religion is the way that other people have pulled together a language for some of those feelings. So I don't always think it's bad. I definitely think it can be preyed upon.
I hope I didn't come across that way.
No, I'm just saying.
Also, I was not a manipulator. It's not like I went, aha, emotion.
I mean, there is truth. There is
I
truth to those
was,
emotions.
Yeah, I was trying to teach and inspire.
It's important to give a space for those emotions, but they can be manipulated for sure. And so, I think that it's important to, not say because you felt the Spirit that one time, you therefore should pay tithing for the rest of your life and never change your mind ever, 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 regardless of how old you are, or God will hate you. I mean, for me, that's the problem. And right. And so to say, in this moment, this language brought you peace and helped you find a way to express that emotion, I think that is a wonderful thing. But, it becomes dangerous when you have to be locked into that system forever.
There was a thrust a few years ago that was articulated to us this way in CES. We need to find a way to get the information that we are teaching our students from the head to the heart. Now, the heart is often referred to as the center of, it's the organ that pumps blood through your body. That's what I believe now. But, in literature and in scriptures, and the heart is the feeling center. It is what you feel. So in essence, I would say that what we were being told was, and again, this is me looking at it now, but young people, and this was said, they understand, they know the right answers. They can checklist and tell you, even quote scripture. But it's not in their heart. And so we were trying to perpetuate feelings or emotion in relation to these bits of knowledge and information. But I feel like the emphasis in doing that discounted the importance and the relevance of intellectual curiosity and studying things on a level where you just critically think. Critical thinking is almost absent in CES. Now, that's a harsh thing for me to say, but what I mean is the student-teacher relationship, as much as we discuss and we ask questions and we analyze, it always comes back to, what does the manual say? What does the scripture say? And to me, it's not truly critical thinking. Now, I feel like I should say that there's a culture behind the scenes in CES that's also relevant and maybe a little bit damaging, and that is, imagine if all you did all day, every day was study the gospel, pretty much. Your conversations with your colleagues would probably go pretty deep, and they did. And so, try to imagine some of the conversations in the temple that we would have, and discussions about obscure doctrines, and just taking things to really deep levels. And as much as I would try not to feel special about such conversations, I did. I felt like I had knowledge that maybe other people didn't, but that in the classroom it was never my place to dispense that knowledge, because that might be pearls before swine, milk before meat. Was that the talk by Brother Millett? Milk before meat, but meat. And so there was always this feeling that the meat will come, but it's not your job to just throw those slabs of meat out there. You got to let people discover on their own. Keep it simple, keep it basic, fundamental teachings, testify. We were told to share our testimony at the end of every single lesson, and even bear testimony upon the individual principles that we would teach as we were going through a lesson. And that, I think, we did very well.
What were some of the, without explaining them too much, what are some of the beliefs behind the scenes by CES employees and instructors that you wouldn't share?
Yeah.
Just a couple, just
that you wouldn't share except for here.
I'm going to get in trouble. Yeah,
no, you wouldn't share
colleagues.
with the students.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple mortal probations was a big one in my area.
So a lot of CES people believe that what?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say a lot of CES people believe, but several of my colleagues in the circles that I discuss these things in believe that there is multiple mortalities.
Because there were references to such in some obscure quotes.
Well,
so almost reincarnation.
Kind of, yeah, along those lines. Let me think of some other ones that, nothing's coming
Polygamy?
to my head. I do recall some discussions of polygamy being required for salvation, and the time at which when the church would have to come to accept that this is going to be, because as I believe you know, Brigham Young very clearly said this is something that will be required for those who go to the celestial kingdom. And the church no longer teaches that, and it's nowhere to be found in our curriculum. But yes, polygamy.
I think some...
And there are different
Joseph
opinions,
Smith.
I should say. Not everybody wholesale just said, oh yes, I believe in multiple mortal probations. Just last year and a half ago, we were driving home from a meeting, and this topic came up, and there were 4 of us in the car, and one of the brethren in there, one of my colleagues who had been in CES a little bit less than the rest of us, had never heard of this, and it blew him away. I mean, this is my perception of his reaction. It was very difficult, and he said as much. The next day I remember him saying, I had a hard time sleeping last night, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. But there are some pretty strong convictions of doctrines like that.
I think you discussed Adam God theory for a while, just in trying to understand that with some of your colleagues.
Well, one of my colleagues, when I was discussing it, Adam God theory, studying it, blood atonement, he said, when I was a young seminary teacher, I studied the same thing, and it was so disturbing to me that I had to put it away, and that would be my advice to you. And at the time, I was like, absolutely, what great advice. I'm just going to push it to the side. And later, I look back on it now, and I think, how could something that a prophet of God taught and recorded, and even in the temple taught, be something that is so disturbing to my spirit? But again, I blamed myself. I didn't have enough faith. I wasn't spiritual enough. But
let me ask you this. I remember a conversation I had with Mark McConkie Jr., so the guy who's my age, who's the son of the stake president that you were talking about, grandson of Bruce R. McConkie.
Yes, great family.
And I was talking to Mark about Mormon doctrine sort of, being phased out. And recently, a year or two ago, Deseret Book actually stopped selling it. But at the time, before it had been phased out, I was talking to him about the changes that they asked Bruce R. McConkie to make. And he said this little thing kind of with a warm but gentle smirk. And the sentiment that he conveyed was the changes that they made to Mormon doctrine weren't changed because they were false. The changes were made because people were made uncomfortable by them, and the decision was made that we didn't want to make people uncomfortable, but we absolutely, as a family, still believe that whatever my grandpa wrote in that book is still the gospel, is still doctrine. And my sentiment is that CES is the last bastion of the guardians of Joseph Fielding Smith, Bruce R. McConkie
That's
dogma.
a great way to put it.
Is that true?
Yeah, my Mormon doctrine book probably had more markings and bookmarks in it than almost any other text that I had outside of my scriptures, which were thoroughly marked, because I did believe that. But I believed in that doctrine.
You believed that, and CES believes that, because that's what we were taught as children.
That's right.
And so what you have is a whole generation of highly correlated teachers that are, again, incredible teachers, incredibly good people for whom the system is working.
Yeah, and why would we ever have reason to doubt an apostle, a prophet, seer, and revelator, even though it was written before he was? It was so clearly in the manuals, quoted in our curriculum, and backed up by the church, and published and reprinted multiple times, that I had no reason to doubt that. I clung to it. I taught from it.
So this is the dilemma, because when Gordon B. Hinckley's with Larry King, and Larry King says, what about polygamy? And President Hinckley's like, I don't know that we teach it, I don't know that we emphasize it.
Right.
Or no. He said polygamy is not doctrine. And then when Time Magazine asks him about theosis, about can man become a god, he says, I don't know that we teach it. I don't know that we emphasize it. It was just a couplet.
Yeah, King followed.
And the fact that the church has phased out Mormon doctrine, it's pretty clear that at the top level that we're distancing ourselves from most of our distinctive doctrines that have sort of that so many of us were raised upon. But it seems like CES hasn't gotten the memo.
Right.
Like they're still believers in all those things that the church leadership is distancing itself from.
Right.
The main backbone of education for the church is perpetuating and encouraging the dogma that is so damaging.
Right. I don't know that I've gotten the memo yet. I mean, I absolutely agree, but I don't think that memo has still come to me through, it's almost like all of these things are being created to make a really nice package, but what this package that has already been created in my mind, in my indoctrination from the time I was a child, that's not going anywhere. And so it becomes a very confusing mix where all of these men who have been so true to their gospel are just trying to disseminate information that they've had to make sense of in their own mind. And so when the curriculum changes and the emphasis changes, I think that you continue to try to do that while still bringing along with you the package of everything that you've had to make sense of already.
Yeah. So, I'm just trying to imagine.
Interesting.
How many thousands of CES and Institute instructors do you think there are?
About 2,500 worldwide, I'd say.
I'm trying to imagine the church leadership going to these 2,500 people and saying, all that stuff that you used to believe and that you taught for 10, 20, 25 years? It's not true. Stop teaching that garbage.
It would be nice if they said
how devastating would it be if a third of those people lost their testimonies or became angry or were pushed towards fundamentalism because they saw the church going weak. And so I can imagine from the church's perspective, maybe Boyd K. Packer's over CES, I don't know, so that it's being protected, but maybe the thought of radicalizing or damaging the faith of this core group of instructors is so terrifying to the church leadership that they can only dribble it out over 3 generations.
Right. If that's the case, they don't see it. In other words, and I don't mean that to be like arrogant, because what I mean is they try very much not to make decisions based on fear. In CES, you know, don't take counsel from your fears and try to have faith. But I thought of some more doctrines, because you asked me specifically about some things that we talk about behind the scenes, and 3 more popped into my mind. One is that there are an increasing number of people, in my estimation, that believe in evolution and that are trying to find quotes and ways to work that in, but the curriculum doesn't allow for that. That the curse of the dark skin might not have been, you know, trying to work through that one. And what was the third one that I thought of? Oh, this most recently at a meeting I was at not too long ago, that the lands of the Book of Mormon may be North America and not South America. These are the kinds of things that are kicked around in hot tubs in meetings that we go to, you know, to train ourselves and stuff, where we're just chilling, you know, we're just talking and
because you're trying to make sense of it all. I think
for me, and I remember in this last meeting that I was in, I was kind of throwing out some of just testing the waters a little bit with Joseph and Carthage and history, and I was actually surprised to have some of these men fire back and really say they were fully aware of this. But the sense in that, and it wasn't a hot tub, I wasn't kidding about that. We were, you know, just hanging out under the stars. It was really nice with my colleagues, and no alcohol though at all. And they said that it was clear to me that they understood and that they knew the history for the most part. But there was this: you don't even have to say it. We don't say it in the classroom. We're not. These are things we're talking about that are not going to go into the classroom, and that's disturbing to me, because again, how can we expect our students to think critically? I have a student, a former student, who I'm going to meet with next week, who I remember 12 years ago as sitting in my classroom in the Bible dictionary. Throughout, I think it was the Old Testament year, maybe New Testament, but he is flipping back and forth. And I remember sometimes him with angst, wanting to ask questions because he had doubts, he had questions, and sometimes feeling like, oh, I hope he doesn't ask that in the middle of class. You know, come to me after class. The last thing I want is for some really intelligent, thoughtful question about the probability of Noah's flood actually happening to pop up in class, because it's my job to maintain, to help develop faith, and anything that might take away from the development of somebody's testimony was to be put out and not to be accepted. And so there is a culture of, and I think that you've articulated it well, and I don't know. I guess I feel to say again that these are very qualified, capable, honest, good people whom I love, and I would never want my comments to be interpreted as me saying, oh my gosh, CES is so bad. But from where I sit now and what I've been through and the perspective that I now have, I would concur with Brother Givens and with those who might say this is not helping the church. That it is the longer we continue to do what CES is doing and what it's teaching, and the more people who know how to get on the internet and Google, the more we're going to see hemorrhaging. There's going to be a continual loss.
And yet, how in the world could the CES people start teaching the accurate history,
right,
and have it not lead to mass defections?
And that's what I was saying when Brooke was. That's what I was going to say. That's the problem. If you are fully honest, right, I think the result is people go, what?
Well,
that's not what I've been told in primary. Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. I think that there are so many people who feel a loyalty to the church as an organization that to say, you guys, we're just going to come clean. First of all, you couldn't do it all in one sitting. Second of all, I think there's a huge percentage of these people who really don't care. For them, you know, the church is about the sociality and the good feelings, and so I don't think that you would see like this mass, and because so many people place their trust in the organization. But I do also think that what you're seeing is a generation of kids, you know, where I was thinking when John was talking, yeah, but we don't tell our kids everything because there are some things kids are ready for or not. But what we see is a generation so capable of not only acquiring information, but thriving on that worldview, that we can no longer pander to them and pretend like they can't handle it. We need to be able to trust them, just as we finally, for the first time in our adult lives, had people say, you're allowed to ask these questions. We trust your capability to live your life and make choices with the advice of loving leaders, with the help, you know. And so while I think that it would be certainly a different path, I don't think that you would see like mass leaving.
You don't?
No, I don't.
Okay, so here's the deal. So
I think you see a lot of people loyal to the church that would remain
create
loyal.
a lot of cognitive dissonance.
So if the church just said, from now on, we're going to teach the true unadulterated history in a faithful way with all the facts, and we'll start with the 14-year-olds, you know, what do you think, inoculation-wise? Do you think that we would raise a whole new generation of people who never again felt betrayed and who just bought the story? I mean, you could argue that a breastplate and a Urim and Thummim is just as weird,
right.
or, you know, a stone in a hat is just as weird as a breastplate. And, you know, so do you think that the church could inoculate and then successfully emerge from the type of curriculum changes you're proposing?
Part of me does. One of my dearest friends who came out to see me after we made the announcement that we had resigned our membership, and he was one who I think responded maybe the best out of all the people that have responded. And he's a bishop right here in this town that we're in today. And he's just a wonderful, intelligent, bright human being. And he made the statement, we were talking about translation of the Book of Mormon and the Peepstone, and he said, if I remember correctly, it wouldn't matter to me if Joseph Smith was standing on his head eating peach yogurt. In other words, to me, that was like saying, you can be completely honest, and if people choose to believe, they can choose to believe. And I've actually asked myself this question. If I had been taught the true and complete and full history of the church, as I understand it to be in the church archives, in the Wilford Woodruff's journals and the Journal of Discourses and all these things, would I have remained? I think there's a better chance that I would have remained a member knowing it with full disclosure and giving me the opportunity to choose. There is I'm not saying I would, because some of it is, let's just be honest, it's out there. It's really hard, I think, to wrap around that. But I would have a better chance of staying than what it is now, which is from the time we're itty-bitty until we reach the adulthood. And for my generation, this is happening a lot in 30s and 40s. And then we go, what? There's something wrong. They told me this. They presented it as this. But I'm now looking into it and I'm saying this is not what I told. Those people, and I'm one of them, feel betrayed, and they feel like that's tantamount to dishonesty. That we need to be, if we're told to be honest in all our dealings with our fellow men, then why wouldn't the church do that? And I get the argument for put your best foot forward, milk before meat, and all these different cliches that we use and scriptures that we use to justify maybe holding back the full floodgates. But I do think that if the church, and again, people will feel differently about this, but I would agree, I think, with Terrell Givens that something needs to be done with the curriculum. What would happen if we rewrote it? How would it play out? I don't think we know. Initially, I think a lot of people would be shocked. Parents, I think, would be very upset because parents really have a trust they rely on you to help their child in these programs, in EFYs and seminary.
Yeah, because when 14, you're thinking, am I going to do drugs? Am I going to have sex?
That's right.
And here the kids are going, Mom, is it true Joseph had 32 wives?
Right.
Did you know that? You know? And some of them were married to other men.
Right.
Like, wow, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Now my girlfriend wants to sleep with me.
That's exactly. And the word of wisdom was revealed in 1832.
Joseph drank alcohol.
Right.
And
It was revealed in 1832.
Had a bar in the Nauvoo house. My buddies wanted to drink alcohol with that.
Brigham Young was drinking even in Utah. And again, and I've said as much on this podcast, there are parts of the story where I could just go, look, he was human, so he fought for his life, so he drank, so he had weaknesses, but instead what is being presented through every CES curriculum, and I haven't even addressed the films, but I hope that that's implied, is a beautiful cinematography, just the cinematography and the music. I mean, it's top-notch stuff. I think the church has tons of money to throw at this. So why not use that money to perhaps create a truthful version with make it, you don't have to, it could be ugly, I think, if you portrayed some of these things the way that they really happened. I don't know. Now I'm starting to feel like I'm trying to sound like it's my duty to defend the church and to justify things that I just think were flat out wrong, and I don't. But you're asking me about CES, you're asking me about change, about the possibility of maybe keeping more people in and having less defection and things like that.
And for me, I feel like the real question is, can that change happen and also come along with the change that, for my first question is, well, to what end? So are we trying to keep these kids in so that they become temple members? Because we haven't even gone to the betrayal that I felt when I realized that I really was pushed into something without having a clue what I was promising. And if I hadn't have promised it, I wouldn't have gotten married. And so, I feel like, well, are we pushing toward a reality where Brandon Flowers is just as Mormon as Thomas S. Monson? Well, if that's the reality,
my favorite band.
Hugs, Brandon. I think that if that's the reality that we're pushing for, this broad, expansive, big tent Mormonism, then by all means, let's get it out on the table. But if we're just saying, we're going to tell you the whole story so that you don't have an excuse to not believe and be a temple recommend holder, period, the end.
Pay, pray, and
More
obey.
control.
Right.
Pay, pray, and obey.
To me, that's where the danger comes, is we have to be willing to be open and say, you know what, there are going to be different ways for different people to take this information.
Yeah.
And all of the ways you can be sanctified in whatever way you choose.
Right.
Remove the stigmas that say, and these exist in CES and in the church, if you don't go on a mission, you're not a good person. If you don't get married in the temple, you're less than. Those things are very strong.
Have premarital sex. If
Yes,
you drink.
that if you commit certain sins that you are just not as good as. And so the student that I mentioned in passing, he did get a mission call, he did go to the MTC, and then he came home. He couldn't deal with it. And the things I remember that were said about him, the speculation about...
Came home early.
Yes, he did. He left the
from the
MTC, and he just said, can't do it.
Why? Because
And at the time, I thought... And I loved him, and he knows that I love him, and he actually recalls talking to me after, and I guess, I don't remember exactly, but I guess I said some good things, and they meant a lot to him, and I did my best not to judge. But I will tell you that the rumors that were being spread, the stigma that was immediately attached, he's probably gay, I'm sure he was committing terrible sins, it's ridiculous. That kind of stigma and that kind of manipulation and control is not healthy.
Well, and when after the fact, years after the fact, actually, we found out that he sat in the airport and wept, not because he had left, but because he was trying so hard to make it work in his head, because he knew he was going to bitterly disappoint his mom, but he didn't know how he could go forward. And, to me, a person like that who has received nothing but people's scorn, actually deserves nothing but people's admiration. To have that level of integrity in the face of all of this pressure, we should be applauding that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left, unfortunately. Okay. Really quick, answer these briefly, very briefly.
Okay.
Quick.
He has to tell us that because we're
chattering.
No, you guys are awesome.
Sorry.
Everything you said is gold. How many other CES employees are where you were a few months ago? Is this something that, is this going to be a trend of CES people leaving the church? Answer that really briefly.
No.
I don't think so.
So you're unique.
I think in that regard. And
we are
unfortunately,
broken in their eyes.
I'm unique in that I lost faith and in a negative way.
Okay.
I'm not like held up on a pedestal in any way.
So you're not representing a trend.
I don't think so.
You don't think there's going to be an increasing amount of CES people that leave?
I don't know.
But if they are, we will be here for them. We will love them.
So here's my
I don't know of a
question.
single other man or woman in CES who feels as I felt. They haven't. If they are there, and there probably are, because just statistically there probably are, they haven't shared that with me.
Okay. What's the difference between you and them then?
We left.
Briefly. No, but what made you...
I'll say what you would say. It was a willingness to look at the whole package and go into it with the question, do I want to know if it's not true? And as soon as we said, we will, as I think it was Tyson who said this in the atheist one, I will go where the evidence leads me. That's the difference.
So
it's just it's one step.
So it's kind of a do what is right, let the consequence follow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
very Mormon thing.
Yes.
Thank you, President Hinckley, for saying that. And because he was
that was a primary song.
But he often said that. That was and that I like the way that Brooke phrased that. I'm just going to say, that I guess I don't need to add to that.
No.
I'm sorry. I was just
No. Go ahead. Keep
didn't
going.
know. when I finally reached the point where I could say, and I recently posted a note on, I've been getting so many questions and text, emails, Facebook inquiries. I posted a note on where I stand on my Facebook page, and this is within like the last week, and I'm starting to get more and more comments, and this might not surprise you, but they're not all positive, and people are unfriending me, but there are a lot of people that are being nice about it. But the difference between where I was then and maybe these other CES men is that I really opened up to saying, this became not just about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for me, but this became bigger about religion and God, and that was a big part of it. I think if I had stayed in a micro level of just circulating within the church and church doctrines, I might have figured out a way to stay. But it was blown wide open for me, and I haven't gotten into that, but studying and reading things like Christopher Hitchens and some of the things that Sam Harris has said and other things. And so it sounds boastful to say my perspective broadened tremendously, right. But that's what happened, and that's why I think I don't know. I'm going to be honest. You asked a question that I'm not sure the answer.
That's okay.
to.
I'm going to ask Brooke.
Yeah.
Brooke,
I'm
because this is gonna. You can't answer this in a way that would be anyway modest. I see two things that would be distinguishing factors in someone like John being willing to face what he faced.
Yeah.
And you, but him because he was in CES. A love for truth and a concern for truth that transcended everything, and a courage to do what is right no matter what the consequences are.
Yes.
Tell me if that's how you see it.
That's absolutely. When I was a girl, my dad embezzled money, and I have always thought that real honesty was not a real thing. And then when I met John, honesty was such a priority to him that it was almost shocking to me. Like I literally didn't know that you could live your life in such an honest way, but he always has been absolutely transparent in that way. So yes, you're dead on those two things for sure.
Okay, all right. So it's time to wind down, and in typical Mormon fashion, we have to end with your testimonies.
Okay.
But I want to change that just a little bit.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for doing this.
Thank you,
Thank you for
John.
having us, John.
I want each of you to take a few minutes and do two things. I want you to share with you. I want you to say what you would like to say to your former students, the former people you've taught. What would you like to say to them? And it's an explanation of a summary of why you've done what you've done, and then what you would want to say to them now that you're where you are, knowing that you were where you were and that you've taught them what you've taught them.
Yeah.
So we'll start with you, John, and then we'll end with you, Brooke.
Okay. I think I would want to say to them first and foremost that I love you. I guess I can look at the camera as if I'm talking to them, that my time in the classroom and as a teacher were some of the greatest times of my life. That to my mission companions, to my mission president, to all these people that I've interacted with over the years in any capacity as a Mormon and as a member of the church or in CES, I love you. My decisions to leave the church and my beliefs, and this is hard because I don't want to say something that, I'm just going to say it. You don't have to do what I've done. The last thing in the world that I would want to say is that since I've left, you should leave. Because I think for some people it's better to stay. I think that it maybe makes more sense. Having said that, your journey is your journey, and your story is your story. And I want to say, if you ever feel like, if you have doubts, that's okay. And if you ever feel alone, that there are people that have gone through very difficult things, and that stories can be rewritten and often are. But I want to say that I love you and that I wish you the very best in your life, and nothing but happiness and joy, even though I think we all know that that's probably not going to happen. And to my colleagues, I feel like this is like a retirement speech that I never had. I would say again that I love you and that I respect you and that I hope that you can look at me still as a friend and as a person of integrity. I'm sorry. I'm not a perfect person, and I have a lot of flaws, but I did the best that I could, and I never wanted to hurt anybody, and I don't want to now. It is what it is, and my story is my story, and I own it, and this is my decision, and I have to live with the consequences. But I just want to mostly say that I love you and thank you for the memories, and that I have a desire to have continued association with former colleagues, with former EFY participants, with these students and people that I really genuinely loved. But I also want to say that I don't believe that the church is what it purports to be. I think that's been made very clear. And I'm not saying that to manipulate them, but I'm saying that to be very clear and to own my position. I'm not even presently sure that I believe in an anthropomorphic deity that is, dressed in a white robe and things like that. And I don't mean that to be rude. I'm just trying to own where I am, and I'm on this journey seeking for truth, and would encourage you to do the same. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to search. It's okay to think critically. And it's okay to associate with your former seminary teacher or EFY director or whatever capacity that we interacted in, because I'd like that. So I think that's all I want to say.
Your turn, Brooke.
Okay, so what I would say to our former students is that, gosh, I think that they're really the main thing that comes to mind for me is that scripture that says, what you seek for, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And I really believe in the words that Christ spoke, which is that what we seek for, that seek and you shall find. And I really do believe that that is a principle that we can pin our lives to, and that when we are seeking good, we find that good. And that is one of the reasons that the church is so good, is that we're looking for it all the time in a lot of ways around us. And I don't feel like that good has left our lives in any way. In fact, I really feel that God and His goodness is open in such abundance around us. And, that is what we're seeking for in our lives, and that is what we continue to find. And so I think that the main thing that I would say is, if you feel like the church is bringing that goodness into your life, then stay and enjoy it, and don't worry about it, and don't push it, and don't fight against it. But if you're feeling unsatisfied and confused, or doubts or questions, or just generally like God is pushing your heart in a different direction, you can trust that His good will carry you, and that you will find it, and you will find it in abundance, and that you're not alone. So anyway, there are good people all over this world, and I'm so grateful to you, John, for being one of those people who I think is open to truth in all of its forms. And anyway, I believe in that. I believe in good. So, tissues.
I hope that people will not mistake my sorrow as, I worry they might be thinking, he feels convicted. Like, he's so sad because he knows that, because some people have said as much to me, that and that's why I've said what I said at the end. It sounded manipulative, like I'm trying to tell you to not believe. I'm just telling you that I don't. And as hard as that was for me, the sorrow that I feel is because it was so much a part of my life, and it was very real, and I didn't fake it. And I really, like Brooke, we have fond memories of our time in the church, and so I think that's been established. But
moving on to John 2.0.
I also believe in good, but it's been hard for me, and we're ready to press forward. And part of our being here, and a thank you for having us, is to share our story and kind of to let the healing begin. To take the next steps and figure out who the hell I am and just go from here.
That's good. The journey is bright.
So now I just have one last yes or no kind of question. In spite of all the pain and the risk and the uncertainty, are you glad you've done what you've done? Brooke?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Absolutely yes.
Do you feel like you made the right decision? For you?
Yes.
For you?
I do, for me.
John?
Yes. And it's only in the last, I would say, couple of weeks where I could answer that in really without equivocation and just say that for our family and for me, that it was the right decision. Do I ponder it and mull it over and revisit it in many different ways? Of course, but we own it. And as hard as it has been, and it has been, very, very difficult. We're optimistic about the future. We think 2012 is going to be a great year, at least until the world ends in December. It's going to be awesome. And then we see good things on the horizon. And we're trying to be positive and move forward from here in the best way we can.
All right. Well, I just want to end by thanking Brooke and John. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for your courage and your honesty. And just to be fair, there's probably a lot of people in the world who have need and are struggling. If any of you want to reach out monetarily to support Brooke and John in their current situation, I just want to invite you to contact me directly or them directly if you have ways to, and maybe support them if you can during this transitionary time where John's trying to find work. So I just wanted to make that plea, that invitation, although they didn't ask me to say that.
No, we did not.
I want to ask any of you who have funds that you want to put towards something, a worthy cause, ask you to consider that. Anyway, thanks for joining us in Mormon Stories. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be back again soon. Check us out on mormonstories.org, and we'll see you next time.
Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day. 'Tis better far to strive our useless cares from us to drive to the sand joy. Your hearts will swell